Mark from Anaheim, welcome back to WOL Radio.
To the windows, to the wall. Good afternoon, Mr. Nelson. Good afternoon to the listeners. Dr. Gerald Horne. For those folks out there who don't know who Dr. Gerald Horne is, I can't think of anyone more eminently qualified in this country to speak on Afrocentric history, both here in the United States as well as back in the motherland.
You're so right. But let me ask you this on a personal note.
I listen to him every chance I can, Mr. Nelson. And
yes,
as far as being a prolific writer, this guy writes books the way I drink water, man. I'm sorry, you had a question for me, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I wanted to know if you felt the earthquake. I'm getting calls from people on your way.
I did. Well, here's the thing. I felt the earthquake. Wasn't sure if it was an earthquake, but now I'm starting to hear reports on the news about it. I was busy harassing folks on Facebook when it was going down, and harassing some of my surfers who were like disappointing me when I know they can do better. But yeah, I felt it.
All right, so it wasn't a big deal then, because
I don't know if it's not a big deal or not, because it could be a precursor to something bigger coming. I know every fire department right now is pulling all their trucks out of their fire stations.
Folks, he just joined us. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Let me tell you, Mark is not his real name. We just used that name when we were doing radio back in the early 90s, and he was still working for the Quasi-Fed and working for the LAPD. But anyway, he spent his first 5 years roaming the streets of Harlem before being sent to segregated Jim Crow Johns Island in South Carolina to live with his aging grandmother. He's also listed in the International Who's Who's of Professionals, and is a former member of many of the globalist organizations, which few ever hear about. He's also provided briefings to NATO personnel regarding less than lethal and also non-lethal technology. He has provided counterterrorism training to personnel from many federal and local law enforcement agencies. He's both a retired U.S. Marine Corps Mustang infantry officer as well as a retired LAPD patrol supervisor. Mark is an FBI certified range master. He's always telling me I got to get a gun, and has served as a technical advisor for several
popular. I didn't tell you have to get a gun. I told you need to get several guns and need to stop driving past that range that all those white folks are going to and get your butt over there and join them right on that range. Didn't you see this woman? Now, what she did was tragic. But what did this woman do before, when she left San Diego and went up there to San Bruno? She stopped by the gun range before she went to YouTube.
Yeah. We'll get into that, Mark. Now, since retiring, he's returned to life as a lazy, this is his words, folks, a lazy surfing beach bum, where he spends much of his time coaching and mentoring some of the most successful young female surfers from around the world.
Where the white women at?
You know what? I got to tell you, though, I did go up to, and Mark, I'm going to tell you right now, it was the first time in my life I ever fired a gun, to be honest with you. That was the first time.
And you probably didn't fire a gun. You probably fired a pistol, but go ahead.
Whatever you gave me. We went up to the LAPD.
Oh, you mean with me?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't recall.
Oh, okay. I don't recall either.
Because I just make all this stuff up. And by the way, for you listeners out there, I don't want you all to come on this show, hear what I say, and believe anything I tell you. You go do your own research and make up your own minds. I'm not on this show to convince you one way or the other. But I will tell you that the only thing I ever share is what I personally know, what I've personally experienced, or what I've thoroughly researched so much that I can come up with no other conclusion. But I'm not here to change your mind about anything. I will tell you, though, as Mr. Nelson will tell you, since Mr. Nelson and I first started doing shows in the summer of 92, I've yet to have somebody come on the show and just come right out and said I was providing you with false information or outright lying to you. So, but you make up your own mind.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because we want people to be critical thinkers. That's what Dick Gregory says. Think for yourself. Don't let anybody tell you anything. You know, if they tell you, go research it, look it up. You know, a lot of times people say things and people just take it as gospel. And Greg was big on that. He says we've got to be critical thinkers. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, you mentioned Dick Gregory, and today is April 5th, of course. 24 hours after the 50th anniversary, if that's a word I could use. I hate that term when it comes to an assassination. But it is the 50th anniversary of the day that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And as you know, Dick Gregory, between Dick Gregory, Mark Lane, and William F. Pepper, I don't know any other people besides those three individuals who did more research in regards to trying to find out the truth into what happened on April 4th, 1968. So, Gray's no longer with us. So I have to dedicate this show today to the memory of Martin Luther King Jr. as well as to Dick Gregory, who tried to let people know what was going on. And William Pepper is still alive. He's getting up there in years, and they try to discount him now. But Mark Lane and Dick Gregory authored a book called The FBI and the Assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., Murder in Memphis is its main title. And the only other book I actually recommend besides Murder in Memphis is Orders to Kill by William F. Pepper. So for you folks out there who are critical, serious researchers, I just call a spade as a spade. Don't waste your time with books like by Gerald Posner. In fact, I have yet to read a book by Gerald Posner that I would recommend. These are the folks that are on the other side of the house who put out disinformation and misinformation, so you can always believe in the lone nut theory when it comes to political assassinations. But I'm sure we'll get into more of that later, Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, because, yesterday we had Judge Joe Brown here.
Who the hell is Judge Joe Brown? Judge Joe Brown, my man. I'm surprised he's still alive. Judge Joe Brown, back in 1998, the entire court system of the state of New York went after him because he was trying to find out the truth, and he was trying to get a new trial for James Earl Ray. So I would imagine yesterday's show must have been very fascinating because Judge Joe Brown, he's been around and he knows what's going on. But being in his position as a judge, sometimes he has to be careful how far he goes too. But they went after him. They went after him big time in the late '90s, claiming that he was biased towards James Earl Ray because he knew that James Earl Ray was not responsible for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, he shared some of the attacks that they launched against him as well. But one of the questions that I asked him, and he didn't seem to know, the FBI agent by the name of Arthur Murtaugh and the term Zorro. Can you fill us in on that?
Oh, so the judge didn't know this, but I, who is just a lazy surfing beach bum, would know this. I liked Arthur Murtaugh. I had a lot of respect for Arthur Murtaugh. I haven't checked in recent years, so I would imagine there's a good chance he's no longer with us either. But Murtaugh was one of the few white individuals out of Memphis, Tennessee, who actually granted interviews, and he basically came out and said that for much of King's civil rights movement years, from 1962 up until 1968, he had 24/7 surveillance on him. Phones tapped, church pulpit microphones tapped, and one of the jokes that Murtaugh would say. But for you folks out there doing research, Murtaugh's last name is spelled M as in Mary, U-R-T as in Tom, A-U-G as in golf, H. Murtaugh, M-U-R-T-A-U-G-H. Anyway, Murtaugh was one of these guys who was part of a group of individuals who were both federal agents as well as civilian contractors working under the auspices of federal agencies who were assigned to monitor Zorro. Zorro was the nickname given to describe Martin Luther King Jr. because they wanted the John Birch Society is heavily involved with the FBI and other federal agencies, and they tried to paint this picture of him being a communist. And when that didn't work to their advantage to try to discount and discredit Martin Luther King Jr., then they tried to really paint this picture of him being one of these sexual promiscuous individuals. Now, I'm not gonna, you know me, Mr. Nelson. I'm not gonna come on the show and lie. Martin Luther King had extramarital affairs. From what I was told, he did because I was a little bit young to know that. One of my babysitters on Johns Island was September Clark, who was the real godmother of the civil rights movement, not Rosa Parks. And I do know I've heard of stories where September Clark used to slap the hell out of Martin Luther King Jr. for doing stupid things, and she was the only one to get away with it. And folks, trust me, I'm not making this up. And one of the things that she would...
Well, hang on a second. We're going to take a break here. All right. 800-450-7876 to speak to Mark from Anaheim. Your calls after the traffic and weather update on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Just saying with us, folks, our guest is Mark from Anaheim. You've heard him before. The number to call to speak to Mark, 800-450-7876. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying before we left for the traffic and weather together.
Yeah, and if people are joining us right now, Mr. Nelson asked me about Arthur Motoff and Zorro. Zorro was the code name for Martin Luther King Jr., and Arthur Motoff was part of this group of both federal agents as well as private contractors working under the auspices of federal agents who were conducting a 24/7 surveillance, not just on Martin Luther King, but others. And I know I'm getting a little ahead here, but I'll just tell you straight out, Mr. Nelson, you do realize King wasn't the only target on April 4th, right?
No, I did not know that. Who else were they after?
2 guys were supposed to go down that day. One ended up becoming ambassador to the United Nations.
Andrew Young?
There he is.
Why was he a target?
He was a threat. He and Martin Luther King Jr. were close. He was a threat. They were supposed to both be eliminated. And
wow.
So anyway, Zorro, I'm sorry?
No, I was going to ask you if there's anything else you can tell us about the King's Inner Circle.
Oh, I'm sure I could tell you lots, but like I told you, man, my babysitter was September Clark. Yeah, I was living with Jaws. I was young. When King was assassinated, I was only 10. So when I was even younger, I didn't really know what was going on back then. But, being a child, especially in those days, we used to eat out of a tin pan, like me and Marie Callender's pie pan. Children didn't eat at the table with the big folks. We sat at a little table, and you ate out of a tin pan, and you kept your mouth shut. When old folks, your elders around, you don't talk. Children don't talk. It's not like the day where people say whatever they want to adults when they're 5 years old. So, but the great thing about being like that is you're a human sponge. So a lot of things that I was hearing as a child, I didn't have a clue until I got older. I'm like, wait a minute. I know that person. Wait a minute. They're talking about my baby. Hey, wait a minute. Seriously, I went through a lot of this when I came out to L.A. and started listening to radio stations like Pacificus KPFK, and they were playing all these old civil rights audio tapes. I call that radio station. I'm like, everybody you just mentioned on that station as a young child, those were my babysitters. Esau Jenkins, Alice Wine, Bernice Robinson, September Clark. I was like, whoa. Back then I just thought of them as old folks that I couldn't stand because they didn't let me get away with anything. So as a very, very young child, I'll just say this, Mr. Nelson, without realizing it, I was right there within their inner circle who were not in Memphis, Tennessee or in Atlanta, Georgia, but they were back on Johns Island, South Carolina. And many of them had gotten fired because merely by joining the NAACP, like September Clark, for example, she lost her entire teacher's pension. If you just joined the NAACP, you lost not only your job but your pension, your entire pension. So, but going back to earlier what we were talking about, because you asked about Zorro, they tried the John Birch Society, which folks you're going to hear me mention that all the time because nobody else is talking about them. You name me one person in Trump's administration, I'll show you somebody who's a John Birch Society member right now who's running and ruining this country for the rest of us. Took them a while, but they got into office now. It started with 22 November 1963, killing Kennedy. So it's sad because you have 3 main groups. You have the mob, you have the John Birch Society, and then you have basically your COINTEL federal government. Now, the John Birch Society permeates between all 3 of those. Okay? But with Zorro, John Birch Society was doing a lot of propaganda, billboard signs, news, King's a communist, blah, blah, blah. And that didn't work to discredit him. So being that he was a minister, they went after the sexual promiscuity angle. So as I was saying before the break, yes, I heard stories that I'm sure were true that Martin Luther King Jr. had extramarital affairs. And, of course, that was alluded to in the movie Selma. But it went further than that when it came to the propaganda. And just yesterday, Mr. Nelson, I had a black female. Well, I'm going to assume it's a black female because somebody could create a fake Facebook account. But I had somebody who appears to be a black female who saw one of my postings about Dick Gregory, Martin Luther King Jr., and myself. And she's like, King was killed because he was a slut. King was killed because he was with white prostitutes. And I'm like reading all this. None of it's new to me. None of it shocked me, and I could have deleted it because I am the administrator for the account, but I left it open because I want other people to read this. And then my response was, see, we don't need the John Birch Society, the Ku Klux Klan, or white separatist groups to provide disinformation and propaganda on my site because we have sisters like this particular person who's doing it for them. Now, I don't know if she's a paid agent. I don't know if she's an agent provocateur. I know sometimes they call in when I'm on the station. However, I'll just say everything she was saying is stuff I've been reading for the last 40 years because it comes straight out of the John Birch Society disinformation pamphlet on Martin Luther King Jr. But it's sad because I do believe there are black folks out there who have also fallen for that garbage. And so they know by saying white prostitutes, see, that separates the colored folks. Because some colored folks just can't handle somebody being with a white person. Hell, I haven't dated a woman in over 10 years, but the mere fact that I coach female servers, and most of them are white, people, even on this radio station, make assumptions. They don't know anything about my personal life. And they tried to destroy King's personal life through the Zorro. But Murtaugh, one of the jokes, and I have old videotapes of Murtaugh doing interviews, and one of his favorite jokes was, so let me get this right. Now, I'm saying this, not he, because, he said J. Edgar Hoover, but I call him Gay Edgar Hoover. Gay Edgar Hoover had the FBI monitor King 24/7. And Murtaugh's joke is, we had surveillance on him every single day, every single hour, every single minute. Yet we don't seem to have any tapes on him and don't know what happened on April 4th, 1968. How could that be? By the way, that's a direct quote from Arthur Murtaugh.
Speaking about Zorro,
yes, sir.
Wesley Snipes how was he a part of this? Wasn't he a movie maker? What did he have to do with Codename
when
Zorro?
Mark Lane and Dick Gregory, folks. By the way, folks, I'm sharing this with you. I have to tell you, Brother Greg and I used to have many telephonic conversations, and there's still so much that he and I used to converse that I'm not going to share anytime soon if I ever share. And one of the things I used to do, because Mr. Nelson alluded to it earlier, when I used to work for several different federal agencies at the same time, along with being with LAPD, I used the nom de guerre when I came on these radio shows. LAPD, by the way, listener, well, Mr. Nelson, LAPD used to send people down to get a copy of the show if I appeared. So, but and even now I still have high-ranking folks from police departments around the country who listen to what I'm saying, because even though they think they're insiders, just as I'm sharing stuff on this show right now, they're like, damn, I never heard this before. Of course, with the internet, they can do more research. But I say this to you because Mark Lane and Dick Gregory, initially they were going to write their book Codename Zorro, but they changed the name of the book to Murder in Memphis. Now, for you folks who don't know this, Wesley Snipes is the person who was originally going to Hollywood with the idea of the movie Black Panther. So I'm happy that this movie has been so successful, but I'm very disappointed and saddened that that idea was stolen from Wesley Snipes when white Hollywood said they wouldn't touch a movie like that, and black folks told him don't waste his time because no white studio would produce a movie like that. And here's several, many years later. By the way, Wesley Snipes came up with that idea like back in 1994. Anyway, so I was hoping that at least, I know he's older now, so why give him a leading role? At least they could have given him a supporting role in that movie because it was Wesley Snipes' idea to begin with. And I don't think many people even here in this show right now know that. I say that in conjunction with Mr. Nelson because he just asked a question about Zorro. Mark Lane and Dick Gregory, their original title for their book was going to be Codename Zorro. Well, Mark Lane and Dick Gregory, as well as William Pepper, they had been meeting with Wesley Snipes. And, God, Mr. Nelson, you need to bring Wesley on the show, man. But Wesley decided,
Wesley's been keeping a low profile, but go ahead.
Well, this is a movie we need to do. And as soon as, I pay attention to stuff like this. As soon as Wesley started saying this is a good idea to take this movie, next thing I know, Wesley Snipes is facing tax evasion charges. Now, the brother did 3 years in prison, Mr. Nelson, for 3 misdemeanor charges. And what most folks don't even know, he was not guilty of the charges leveled against him. More importantly, they purposely held a trial in Ocala, Florida. I'm sure you know a little bit about Ocala, Florida, Mr. Nelson, Because I'm sure them white folks down there don't really care too much about them colored folks. And Wesley Snipes never lived in Ocala, Florida, so nobody even knows why the trial was held there. But anyway, 9 members of the jury came right back and said he was not guilty. And 3 members on the jury who I understand lied to even get on that jury were the ones responsible for him getting 3 misdemeanor charges against him. And that put an end to the making of Codename Zorro. So I would suggest if you can, reach out and try to find Wesley, because I try to keep my ear to the ground, but I'm out of the game now. I'm just a lazy surfing beach bum. I don't spend much time in Hollywood anymore, and I don't hang out with too many spooks or cops anymore. But rumor has it Wesley might be trying to make that movie again.
All right. We'll just put out some feelers and see if we can find him.
However, I will just say to you that there are 2 things that Wesley did that I noticed that took him down. Wasn't so much the Black Panther movie, but Wesley had starred in several other movies prior to him talking about making Codename Zorro. And the movies that he stars in are usually movies involving international politics, intelligence agencies, including the United Nations. And sometimes, like I say, people don't know how much you know when you're watching a movie. I've seen several of Wesley's movies that I know are closer to reality than people have any idea. But I know we got a break.
Hold that thought right. All right, hold that thought right there. I'll let you finish your thought on the other side. Folks, you too can join our discussion with Mark from Anaheim. Reach out to us, 800-450-7876. Your calls are next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450, WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and then the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Before we left, we were talking about Wesley Snipes, and he did the book The Great and Mighty Walk, the story about John Henry Clark. It's just one of the good movies that he did. I know he was working we did speak to him right before, as a matter of fact, come to think of it now, right before he went away. But we haven't had a chance to speak to him again. But anyway, Mark, I'm going to let you finish what you were saying.
Well, so I asked you earlier, Mr. Nelson. I'm sure you know about Ocala, Florida. You know about that town down there. Ocala, Florida. What do you know about Ocala, Florida?
Ocala. It's. I think it's just north of Orlando. Wesley was. That's where Wesley's from. Actually, he's from Orlando, the Orlando area, and he grew up in the Bronx. But that's just north of Orlando. Right,
but see, he never lived in Ocala, but that's where they insisted on having the trial. Now, why would they hold the trial there, Mr. Nelson?
It's a mostly white area, of course.
Mostly white. That's putting it mildly. They knew that he wasn't going to get it. In fact, let me just tell you a little bit about that case. Do you realize that every black who was supposed to be screened as a possible juror was sent home before the jury was even decided on?
No, did not.
So that would leave only what types of folks to be waiting to be selected for jury duty.
Was it an all-white jury?
Of course. And 9 of them still came back saying, oh, please, that brother didn't do this. And by the way, I should just tell you this, folks, because, see, these folks never go away. Guess what attorney was involved that started this whole headache and set Wesley Snipes up from the beginning?
I have no idea who.
Who was involved with going after Bill Clinton?
Going after Bill Clinton. Can't think of him right now.
Ken Starr.
From Pepperdine. Okay.
It's a small world, ain't it?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, when people are sitting here whining about why don't they hurry up with this investigation on Trump, I know some of you folks are there too young to remember, and some of you too old because you can't keep your memory. When they went after Bill Clinton, it took them 5 years. This investigation has been going on for less than a year, and they're acting like it's the end of the world, and they want to hurry up and get it over with. And the only reason they want to hurry up and get it over with because they don't want this to affect the midterm election. They went after Bill Clinton for 5 years, and they didn't go after him for Monica Lewinsky. They threw a broad net out, couldn't get him for anything else, and after they had already exhausted almost 5 years, they finally came up with Monica Lewinsky, who was groomed by, as you know, Mr. Nelson, Linda Tripp out of the Watergate Hotel. So, but it's a small world, and I don't think Wesley saw it coming. But, yeah, he being involved with folks like Ken Starr is not a good thing in the Hollywood industry or any other industry. And Wesley didn't go down as badly as Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey did, but he basically went down for the same reason. He was involved with Hollywood television, movie, and or a straight-out movie script that would have a very significant impact on the John Birch Society and people running the White House and Congress and the Supreme Court right now.
Mark, before I take calls here, I want to ask you about Cambridge Analytica.
I'm sorry.
Because a lot of us, use Facebook. I'm sure you use it as well.
I only run 31
media.
Facebook sites. There's no one else who has more photographs on Facebook than I do. And you don't hear me worried about Cambridge Analytica.
All right.
You know why?
Why?
One, I don't go on, like I tell people all the time, don't be putting all your family business out there for the whole world to see. I don't worry about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Well, also, I'm not the kind of person Cambridge. I don't think many people on this show are the ones that Cambridge would target when it comes to Donald Trump. But since you brought that up, Mr. Nelson, let me enlighten their listeners. I just mentioned Kevin Spacey, and I mentioned Harvey Weinstein. Now, I said that Wesley Snipes went down because he was going to become a threat if he had gone through with Mark Lane and William Pepper and Dick Gregory and making codename Zorro. Well, Weinstein went down because he became a threat by producing that movie, American Made. Of course, Spacey went down because this TV show, House of Cards, folks need to watch that show. That show even shows you this. That show even reveals to you the Bohemian Grove. So I'm just telling you, a lot of stuff people think out there is just entertainment is a lot more close to reality than you know. Well, as you look with this Cambridge Analytica, Mr. Nelson, that was mentioned on House of Cards back in 2015.
2015.
You heard me. In fact, so anybody who's acting shocked and surprised is lying to you because they know the average person listens to this show. And I'm not giving you folks a hard time because you're just hardworking people trying to make ends meet. You don't read. You don't research. You're distracted with the Kardashians. You can Google Internet right now and just Google American-made Polly Pop. And you will see that everything they're telling you today about Cambridge Analytica was shown to you. I'm sorry, not American Made. House of Cards. Google House of Cards Polly Pop. Because they didn't call it, they can't use the name Cambridge Analytica, which, of course, is a John Birch Society owned by the Mercer family. The Mercers are the ones who put the money that put Donald Trump in the White House. I came on this show with Mr. Nelson more than 2 years ago and told you folks about Brexit. And I told you the same John Birch Society people in this country creating havoc for Barack Hussein Obama are creating havoc over in Europe across the pond. And I don't hear your listeners anymore from across the pond calling Mr. Nelson. But anyway, that's the Mercer family. They're doing over there with the Brexit movement over there what they're doing to this country to create a civil war. Same folks, same money. I even came on this show and told you all about 4 or 5 years ago how back in 1972, the Republican National Convention was scheduled to be down in San Diego, California. And there were certain groups, same group, by the way, Mr. Nelson, involved with Kennedy's assassination, King's assassination, the other Kennedy's assassination. These groups were hiring blacks, browns, and whites to make them appear to be agents provocateurs and domestic terrorists to blow up the Republican National Convention down in San Diego. When a few of those operatives went public with that, the Republican National Convention was moved from San Diego to Miami, Florida. And that's why if you look at a movie like Born on the 4th of July, you'll see, God, talk about small world, the same guy who plays an American Made is the star in Born on the 4th of July. Our favorite, Scientologist, Mr. Mission Impossible himself. But in that movie, Born on the 4th of July, they don't really come out and tell you this, but the only reason that was held in Miami, Florida, is because they had to move it from San Diego because they were afraid that that domestic terrorist attack was going to go through. So these folks could get their draconian laws passed in this country for basically all-out surveillance on all of us. And if you notice, Trump right now wants to put military on the border. I already told you. For you folks out there who think sanctuary cities exist, there's no such thing as a sanctuary city. Local cops don't enforce federal law. So if you're so racist that you allow local cops to enforce federal law when it comes to immigrants, guess what? You open that door, there's no posse comitatus. Right now, Trump making all these statements. Oh, I'm going to send the military down there. You can't send the military down there. So what is he doing now that he realizes he don't know what the hell he's talking about? He's sending the National Guard. And even by sending the National Guard, they cannot perform local law enforcement duties. So they're going to be tasked with construction work and surveillance and intelligence gathering, but they cannot actually do law enforcement because under posse comitatus, federal military doesn't do that in this country. But, you know, you guys put a dictator in the White House, so he's going to find a way pretty soon to circumvent that. And so for all you white separatists, you know, we love Trump, you don't even realize he's going to be the one that's going to round you up. First he'll come after the colored folks, but he'll come after you too. So when you ask this question, Mr. Nelson, it's all connected. And in the TV show in the TV show House of Cards, they show Kevin Spacey running for president. Now, in the show, the only difference is he uses a guy from the NSA to tap in to all the social media sites, whereas, as you know, with the Facebook, it was actually a private entity. And you can even Google on the internet. Back in 2015, there are reputable sites that ask, could what was depicted on House of Cards happen in real life? None of this is new. The only reason you're hearing about it now is because across the pond there's a trial going on, and there's a whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica across the pond who's telling you the stuff that the U.S. newspapers aren't reporting. So I hope that helps answer your question. I will tell you this. But here's the thing. Before Trump used it, it was Barack Hussein Obama who brought Cambridge Analytica's technology into Facebook. And so many people within the Democratic Party, even though they wanted to see Barack Hussein Obama win, they started complaining about the intrusion on Americans' privacy. They shut the program down and changed it. And the Republicans just picked up the baton, as we say, and continued on with it later on. Now, how much Zuckerberg knew about it or not, I don't know, but I will tell you this. It wasn't confined to the U.S. Practically every African country that's had an election in the last 6 years, Cambridge Analytica was involved, including ongoing tensions right now in Kenya.
You know, I was going to ask, and we caught up on a break, but I was going to ask you, what does Cambridge Analytica do? What did they do with that?
Mercer was one of these guys who's into algorithms.
Well, hang on a sec. Right, hang on a sec, because we got a break coming up. I don't want you to start your thought and then lose trend. Folks, you too can join this discussion. Call up for some of your friends and tell them Mark from Anaheim's on the radio. You can reach us. Our number is 800-450-7876. I'll give you that number again. It's 800-450-7876. Got to take this quick break. We'll come back to discuss Cambridge Analytica. So I don't think everybody understands how they work. Right here on FM 95.9 and also AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Staying with us, folks. I guess it's Mark from Anaheim. As you know, Mark's not his real name. He's really not from Anaheim, but you know what he does and the information that he provides. Number to call to speak to him is 800-450-7876. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish your thought that you started before we left for the traffic and weather update.
Yeah, you know, you took me into Cambridge Analytica, and I just wanted to let the listener know, because we were talking earlier about Wesley Snipes' codename Zorro. Last year, a lot of people got real excited around the anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination because they thought Donald Trump was going to finally release all the files. And even Bill Clinton, when he was president, had signed a bill that had been introduced by Congress that all the files would be released in 2017. You notice, Mr. Nelson, how they didn't release all those files?
He talked about it.
And you know why they didn't release all those files?
Why is that?
Because some of the people who were involved with Kennedy's assassination were involved with King's assassination, and the files on King are sealed until 2029. So I just wanted to let the listeners know out there, if you want to do some review for you serious researchers out there. I actually had my Facebook status on 22 November back in 2017 was, for anybody who thought those files were going to be released, you're an idiot, because John Birch Society administration, Trump and Pence are not about to let those files come out. They can't let you know what Carlos Marcello from the mob said and how he along with John Birch Society members like Joseph Milter, Milteer, and, different folks within government agencies were all involved in both John F. Kennedy's assassination as well as King's. So I already knew Trump was never going to release all those files because the King's files are supposed to be sealed until 2029. And even then, they may be heavily redacted. So I just want to let the listeners know that for those of you who you're real young but you like to do research but don't believe anything I tell you, research Carlos Marcello. Guys like Santo Trafficante, Sam Giancana Jr., dude, those boys ruled down there in Louisiana, Mr. Nelson, the Dixie Mafia. Hell, even back in Bill Clinton's neck of the woods. In the wintertime, most of those guys went to a little resort back there in Arkansas. A certain spring. Even the boys from New York come all the way down to a certain spring in Arkansas for their resort. And Robert F. Kennedy was an idiot because John got in the White House because his dad cut deals with the mob. Then John allows his brother become Attorney General, and what does his brother do? His brother goes after the mob. He's biting the hand that feeds him. So, cut the head off, the body will die. So they cut the head off, got rid of John, and Bobby, who was going to indict Lyndon Johnson along with some mafia boys out of South Carolina. All those charges dropped the next day when Robert Kennedy was no longer Attorney General. Then, like in '88, when he decided he's going to run for president, and the first thing he was going to do as president was reopen his brother's murders investigation, they had to cut that head off too. So I hope that helps answer that question. But getting back to what you were saying right before the break, when it comes to Cambridge Analytica, it's not difficult to understand. I'll just take myself as an example. About 6 years ago, because I coach, mentor female surfers from around the world. Well, I met a certain female surfer from Canada who I thought was smoking hot, and so I don't know, but I took it upon myself to send her a little message. I was kind of flirting with her, but not really, but just messing around, flirting with her. Well, ever since I sent her an email, now when I go on my Facebook or if I go on Yelp, all of my ads are coming from Canada. So apparently whatever site that she has that I contacted her on, my emails and my responses to her are being data mined by some group out there, and they just assume, well, if I'm contacting her, then I must be from Canada too. And I joke about it. I said, for the last 5 years, I go on Facebook now, I get ads, I get invitations, I get events from Canada every single day on my Facebook. If I go on Yelp, I have to reprogram and retype everything because it shows me, and since I'm in California, I'm used to using CA for the state of California. Well, if I do that, it sends me to Canada. It just assumes I'm from Canada. So I'm saying the same thing with folks out there. When you are on AOL, Yahoo, whatever, your emails are being data mined. You might have a conversation in an email with your friends. You go back and sign on to a social media site. Now you're getting ads based on something that you and your friends said in what you thought was a private email. Well, during election time, Mr. Nelson, just like I'm receiving ads from Canada, you have folks out there that go on right-wing, far right-wing, I hate Obama websites, birther websites, and because they've gone on those birther websites, they are now bombarded with news stories. Many of them aren't true, saying all these nefarious things about Hillary Clinton to get people not to want to vote for Hillary, and at the same time get them to share those news stories with their friends. And once you share it with your friend, now that database company has somebody else you've reached out to. So after a while, it's like that 6 degrees of separation. And there were even congressmen, Mr. Nelson, who got totally 100% fictitious news feeds about Hillary Clinton during the campaign that went and sent them out to their constituents as if it was the gospel because they didn't do any fact-checking on it because it was what they want to believe. We live in a society today where most people do empathy bias, Mr. Nelson. They purposely seek out only those news sources, if that's the term you're going to use, only those sources of information that corroborates what you already want to believe, whether it's true or not. So that's all Cambridge Analytica does. Cambridge Analytica figures out based on the algorithms of the type of things that you go on. That's the kind of profile they build on you, and that's the kind of profile they figure, are you more likely to vote Democratic, Republican, moderate, liberal, libertarian, progressive. Now, it's still statistical data, and it's not always 100% correct. And there's even times when Mercer said that he didn't think his program should have been used the way it was because it didn't turn out to be as successful as he thought. But there's some people who live by it, Mr. Nelson.
You know, a lot of folks, Alex Jones, they buy whatever he says, and then they just recite it or copy and paste it.
And it gets worse than that, Mr. Nelson, because Alex Jones has a good job of. It's been in the media thousands of times. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. I can Google my name right now and get 1.7 million hits. But if I was to go through those 1.7 million hits, the same website has probably been repeated 27 times. So that doesn't mean there's 1.7 different websites out there carrying my name. Also, Alex Jones, he takes his source for news from alt-right, Breitbart, RT, which is nothing but a public propaganda piece for, the Russian government, and other sources that he's not getting a well-diverse round of sources of information. See, I'm not a Democratic. I'm not a Republican. You can't give me a label. And much of the information I provide, I don't get from U.S. media sources. If I want to know about another country, I read U.S. media. If I want to know about the U.S. media, I read outside sources. So, I listen to everything. Unfortunately, I can't think of many friends of mine I can say do that. They either all listen to right wing or what little left wing's out there, because there really isn't that much left wing. But this is the lie. Repeat the lie long enough, people believe it. The bigger the lie, more people believe it. And what do they tell you? Well, the media is for Donald. No, they all hate Donald Trump. 6 corporations control 97% of the media in this country. That's it, 6 corporations. So I strongly suggest you folks go out and see who those 6 corporations are and see who the actual owners are and see how liberal those owners really are. But see, you keep hearing that lie all the time, and that's why they're justifying now Sinclair Media Group now going to control 71% of all television stations in this country. Because it doesn't matter what your message is. If you don't have a TV station that's going to put your message out, nobody's going to hear your message. They're going to soon have total control where you're going to hear nothing but David Duke Network. And they're going to tell you anybody else you listen to is fake news. And it's getting more difficult. I have to say, even for me, Mr. Nelson, it's getting more difficult every day for me to tell what's real and what's totally twisted.
Well, hang on a sec, because we got a bunch of folks been holding. They want to talk to you. They got questions for you.
Oh, before we get started, Mr. Nelson, I'm just asking the listeners today, please ask one question and one question only. And if you don't, I'm only going to answer one question.
All right, cool. 800-450-7876 is the number. Line 2, I think it's Marilyn calling from D.C.
Hi, yes. Hi, Mark. I tried to join you in cyberspace for that happy hour, but Facebook wouldn't allow me to comment. Allow the rest of my day being cut off of my phone calls and hearing my voice echo back to me. But I would like to know your opinion on that.
Hold on, sister. Wait, sister, before you go on. Now, for you folks don't understand, because the sister's talking in codes. Right before I came on Mr. Nelson's show, I said, should I light the happy hour lamp before I go on the show with Mr. Nelson, or should I wait till I get on the show to start getting drunk? Secondly, what the sister's alluding to is anytime somebody contacts me directly by internet or by phone, they have all kinds of problems with their internet service and their telephones afterwards. But I'm sorry, sister, go ahead.
Yes, the brother that was found, the CDC worker in the river today.
Yes, yes, ma'am. You talking about Cunningham?
Yes.
Never heard of him.
That was my question.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Excuse me. So here's the thing. There's a brother who worked for the Center for Disease Control. And he doesn't necessarily go along with the company line, and he has some alternative ideas on things that the CDC has been kind of clamping down on him. Now, allegedly, this brother got turned down for a promotion, and he disappeared. I mean, the same day that he did not get his promotion. Now, of course, the CD since then has denied this is true. The brother's been missing now for quite a while. I mean, several weeks. And in the last 24 hours, his body was supposedly found in a river down in, DeKalb County. So I don't know enough about that, and I will not come on this show and speculate about an ongoing investigation. So right now they're not saying whether that's murder, whether it looks like a suicide. However, I will share this much. I've had my share of murder investigations. I've definitely seen my share of murders. And the one thing about his situation, without knowing this brother at all, this brother worshipped the ground that his dog walked on. So if this brother was distraught and decided he was just going to up and leave and disappear, the one thing I don't think this brother would have done, based on what I've heard about how much he loved his pet, was leave his pet in the apartment unattended without anybody watching them. So I would have to say, based on my knowledge, my experience, and my background, there may be a little bit more here than just a brother who was distraught and left work and maybe wanted to do harm to himself. But I have no personal knowledge on that, so I'm not going to share any more than that.
All right, we're coming up on a break as we're closing on the top of the hour. And when we come back, Brother Jamal Tweedy says he just reached out to Wesley Snipes and he also wants to know about Nigel Farage and his relationship with Donald Trump. I'll let you attack that on the other side. Folks, you too can get in. Just reach out to us. 800-450-7876 gets you in. That's the lucky numbers. We'll take your calls next right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. The number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. And we're going to get to the calls that I mentioned. Before we left for the top of the hour break, Mark, Brother Jamal tweeted that he's gotten in touch with Wesley Snipes. I'm sorry, his name just left me a moment ago. But he wants to know about Nigel Farage and his relationship to Donald Trump, the British conservative leader.
I can't provide any information on that, Mr. Nelson. Not because I am hesitant. I just don't. I don't have any personal information to provide on that.
Yeah, this guy's leading the Brexit, so I guess.
Well, no, I understand that, but I mean, yeah. I don't really know enough about his direct relationship with the Trumps, other than the fact that I know behind the scenes you still got the same money players. You follow the money, and I guarantee the Mercer family's involved with that. But I will share this before we take. I'll share this before we take the next call, because what the sister was trying to allude to was she believes that perhaps the CDC individual was not going along with the flu vaccination program, and he wanted to share information telling folks not to take the flu shot. Well, that's possible. I don't know. I'm not going to share information I don't know. I will share something that I wasn't there, but I've heard from enough people that I think I do know. If you remember earlier, Mr. Nelson, I talked about gay Edgar Hoover, not J. Edgar Hoover. Now, I'm not calling him gay because I have a problem with homosexuals. I couldn't care less about homosexuals. I'm not one. They don't pose any threat to me. The only reason I say gay Edgar Hoover is because he went out of his way to destroy the lives of so many people, especially in politics, who happened to have been gay when he himself was gay. So I mentioned to you earlier, Mr. Nelson, about Carlos Marcello, did I not? Right. I have a photograph. Don't ask how I got it. There's nothing salacious in the photograph, but I do have a photograph of Gay Edgar Hoover down at the Del Rey horse tracks down here in San Diego County, because that was one of his vices. He loved horse races. Some folks who aren't around anymore have told me that there was a news reporter, a very prominent news reporter here in the Southern California area, who lost his job because he just happened by accident to walk into the men's room at the Del Rey racetrack. Now, this is back in I want to say late 40s, maybe early 50s. But he walked in while Gay Edgar Hoover was in there with a little boy. And because he happened to have seen that, he lost his job the next day. And I say that to you because getting back to the King assassination, much of what Carlo Marcello and the guys did down in Louisiana Mafia, the Southern Mafia, they got away with it because Carlo Marcello allegedly used to provide the little boys for Gay Edgar Hoover. There it is.
Interesting. All right. Let's take some calls to you. 800-450-7876. Kiki's calling us from Iowa on line 3. Kiki, you're with Mark from Anaheim.
Hey, Mark. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you, Carl, for hosting the show. I wanted to know what the bombings that's been happening. First, it was in Texas with the packages, and then what was swept underneath the rug was a gentleman had went to a military base and blew himself up or something like that. You had mentioned on the show, on the other morning show a few days ago, that there's going to be attacks and things going on in this country that we can't even believe. It took Texas PD like 2 weeks to call the guy who was doing the package deliveries a domestic terrorist. They just kept saying, oh, he's just a young kid or a young adult and had mental health problems, but they did not want to call him a domestic terrorist. And then a guy that blew himself up in the car, they didn't really talk about that anymore. So my question to you is, do you think that all of this is linked to what you had said about different attacks going on in the country, and how a lot of people, mostly probably Caucasian males, are trying to, take this country back, and it's pretty much going over black folks' heads in the country? And I'll take my call off here. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Nelson, this sister lives in Iowa. At least that's what she claims to be calling from. Iowa and Ohio are two of the prominent states right now where blacks are dying left and right and nobody talks about it. For you folks out there don't believe me, just Google 65,000 black women missing or dead and see what you come up with. Now, that's a small number. It's a lot bigger than that. But what I'm just telling you is this. A few years ago, you had a black guy out here who worked for 77th Garage, LAPD 77th Station Garage, and he was arrested and convicted for several murders, and they called him the Grim Sleeper. And I know you got folks out here like Margaret Prescott and others who really push that, and that's all well and good, but the fact is they try to place all these murders on this brother, and I'm telling you, he ain't the one doing it. Besides that, there are 200-plus more black women who were murdered that nobody to this day has been charged with. So let's backtrack. Mr. Nelson, as you know, on June 12, 1994, there was a white woman killed in West L.A. along with a Jewish guy. Now, this white woman, she wasn't born in the U.S., she was born in Germany. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed Erin used to be married to a Negro. Well, all I can tell you folks is this. I've never said whether O.J. did it, never said whether he didn't do it. I will tell you I did refuse to testify in that trial when I was called in by the prosecuting team. And I will just tell you this. You can just go back and check out the Turner Diaries. The Turner Diaries, which were written, by the way, in 1978. The Turner Diaries specifically state that in 1993, 1994, they're going to begin killing white Aryan women who betrayed the white Aryan race by marrying or dating Negroes. Of course, they didn't use the word Negro. You look that one up for yourself. And I say that to you because you know Mr. Nelson, who lived next door to Nicole. In fact, you know who called 911, right?
No, who did?
Well, his father used to be DCI, Director Central Intelligence, William Colby.
Colby's son?
That's correct, Mr. Nelson.
The reason why it's sort of, well, because, he was involved, too, in the Bob Marley thing. Bob Marley supposedly.
Oh, really? And, I came on this show, Dick and I were on this show, and I finally admitted this to my daughter not too long ago, and she just gave me this dirty look. But the fall following the 92 civil unrest in L.A., I was invited to an OSS reunion. Now, I had started doing radio shows with you right after the civil unrest because you had folks coming on your show out here in L.A. saying stuff on the radio, and I'm like, they don't have a clue what the hell they're saying or what they're doing and just making themselves easily arrested. So I started coming on the show providing information and facts instead of speculations and crap. Well, I already knew LAPD and other agencies were monitoring me every time I came on your show. And when I got an invitation from the OSS reunion to go to a reunion, I'm like, why the hell would they be inviting me? I've never been a member of the OSS, even though many of my mentors were. So I kind of figured I must have said something on your show to piss some people off, so they're going to, take me out. So anyway, my daughter was only like 2 years old at the time, so I figured if I took my daughter with me, they weren't going to kill me. So I told you, Dick Gregory, this on your show one time, and Dick Gregory, that's because you're a fool. They don't give a damn about killing you in front of your 2-year-old daughter. And, of course, I told him, yeah, because that same day while I was down there, Ian Sparrow was found dead out in the desert after his family had been killed. They claimed that Ian Sparrow killed his whole family and then committed suicide, even though Ian Sparrow's dog was decapitated next to him when they found his body. And if Ian Sparrow had committed murder and killed his whole family down here in San Diego County, why did MI6 and MI5 put everybody across the pond who were members of his family in protection if Ian Sparrow's the one who did it and he's already dead? So I said all this because when you start talking about the things and the connections, it's like it's all connected. So when you come back to Colby, that same show that I was talking to Dick Gregory about Ian Sparrow and how I took my daughter to the reunion. By the way, my daughter was the life of the party. She was only 2 years old, so she was drinking mint juleps all day long. I mean, we're talking serious OSS spooks, right, from World War II. Hell, I was the youngest person in that room except for my daughter. I should tell you this aside now, too. In that same meeting when I left, 3 guys got on the elevator with my daughter and me and goes, hey, I heard you work for LAPD now. I'm like, yeah. What did you think about the 92 riots? I'm like, well, anybody would have a brain could see that was being set up. Every time I watched the news, they always had something negative about law enforcement. Hell, sometimes they would have a badge with a hole in the background behind the damn news reporters. And the boys looked at me and said, well, when you go back, you tell Daryl Gates and the rest of them boys, we ain't done with y'all yet. So right there, Mr. Nelson, by them saying that to me, what are they telling you about the riots?
Oh, they already knew. It was set up.
Exactly. So are you folks listening out there who are falling for the okie doke right now with all the crap being shoveled at you? I don't give a damn if you're white, brown, yellow, black. You're falling for the okie doke to set up because what happened in 92 was what's supposed to have happened to create the Civil War, but Daddy Bush did not send the Marines in to kill the blacks and brown folks, and it didn't work the way Ollie North and the boys planned. Ollie North and the boys are back. And they got an idiot in the White House who will sign anything they put on his desk. And you folks are falling for the okie doke. I got 3 boys in suits telling me, we ain't done with you yet, which tells you they manipulated the media. They manipulated the population. They pushed you to the point where you couldn't take it anymore and you want to go out in the streets and start rioting. That's how the system works. When you think you're fighting the system, you're doing exactly what the system wants. And I say that to you because what Mr. Nelson just talked about and how this one individual is involved in all this stuff. When I came on that show with Mr. Nelson talking to Dick Gregory about Ian Sparrow and all this, somehow we got into William Colby. And I was angry. I used to keep in touch with William Colby. He was an OSS boy. In fact, he was involved with bringing the Dalai Lama here from Tibet. So I know he's a hell of a swimmer. He was a better swimmer than I was. And I taught water safety instruction for the Marine Corps and a whole bunch of other folks. Well, I'm sorry, blacks can't swim. Anyway, so what happened is we got a break coming up.
Yeah. So hold that thought. 800-450-7876 is your number to call. Speak to Mark from Anaheim. Your calls are next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. And thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Mark, even though it's not his real name, he's really not from Anaheim, but you know him. 800-450-7876, number to call. Speak to him, though. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish up your thought that you started.
No. Nice try. I told you that on June 12, 1994, they found this blonde, blue-eyed Aryan woman and a Jew, so they don't care about him either. And I told you that the person who called 911 was the son of former DCI William Colby.
Right.
And how did you respond?
No, I was saying because he was involved in allegedly with the Bob Marley quote-unquote killing. He supposedly gave Bob Marley the shoes. Now,
the reason I'm dragging Dick Gregory's, I know, brother, you down there laughing because I don't see. Let me tell you how this worked, Mr. Nelson. In the old days, I would be on the phone with Greg. Greg would go out in the community and share what I had told him, and that way it never came back on me. And now I don't have that anymore, okay? I don't have that buffer. Now it's coming directly from me. So anyway, but we were on the show that day, and I was telling Brother Greg about how, I figured they wouldn't whack me because I took my 2-year daughter. And he's like, yeah, those evil, filthy, they'd kill you and your daughter. Well, and somehow we got into the conversation about Colby, and I said, I'm still angry at Stevie Wonder because back in 96, And as you know, when we did radio shows out here, I never went to the radio station. I always did the shows from home on the telephone. Then one day so I'm blaming you too, you call me at home and tell me that Stevie wants me to come down to the radio station. I'm like, okay, that's unusual. So I go down to the station. The next thing you know, he's pumping me for questions about the death of Ron Brown, who was flying on Air Force Two that crashed in Bosnia. I told him what I had been told, and, the next day I fly out to Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm in my hotel. I'm watching TV, and here I see Stevie Wonder playing at the White House with the Clintons and Ron Brown's family. By the way, Ron Brown's from Charleston also. And if you all folks don't know this, Ron Brown's daughter was a deputy DA here in L.A. that wrote this. Well, she didn't write it. Some ghost-written book with her name on it. And I guess Stevie must have talked to her, because in her book, she starts off the book by claiming, and yeah, there's some people out there who said my dad didn't die in a plane crash, but he was murdered. Well, that's not going to bring him back. And I'm like, okay, what daughter would say that about her father? And more importantly, somebody who's a prosecuting attorney in the deputy DA's office is going to say my father was murdered, but I don't care because it ain't going to bring him back? That's what we were dealing with back in the 90s. But I remind you of all this, Mr. Nelson, because that was in 96. Shortly before Ron Brown, all that was going on with Ron Brown, you had the Air Florida crash, and then you also had, not Air Florida, it was Value Jet, because the Olympics were coming up. You had Value Jet crash, but you also had William Colby, who supposedly drowned. Now, mind you, William Colby, he's at home alone. He drowns. There's a serious storm going on, but he drowns while swimming, even though his food on the table is untouched. And I knew William Colby was a hell of a swimmer, because many of my OSS mentors were, they knew William Colby very well. So I was already angry that William Colby had died, and they claimed that he accidentally drowned. And I was already angry that Stevie kind of set me up with the Ron Brown thing. But when I shared all this with Dick Gregory, this is what Dick Gregory says. He's doing some live show. He's talking about the suspicious death of William Colby, and guess who's sitting in the audience?
Who?
Colby's son. Who basically came out and said he didn't believe anything anybody said. His dad accidentally drowned. So while we were waiting for the break to end, I grabbed one of my little DVDs I have here. For you folks out there who don't have a damn clue what we're talking about, there's a great DVD that came out that's called The Man Nobody Knew, In Search of My Father, CIA Spy Master William Colby. Once again, The Man Nobody Knew, In Search of My Father, CIA Spy Master William Colby. And this is by Carl Colby. Now, I'm disappointed. I mean, everything in here is factual, except for the part where he just doesn't believe that his father was murdered. But if you all want some good history on stuff that you're not hearing in mainstream media, because right now everybody talks about how great Eisenhower was, we have a saying, when the Marine Corps is too noisy, you send in the men of CIA. And the great thing about this movie, it shows you William Colby and how he was instrumental in trying to overthrow governments all over the world during the 1950s and then later on in Vietnam. So it's got some great actual footage, historical footage in it, but I just can't deal with the fact that, my dad died, accidentally drowning. And I will tell you this, because, full disclosure here, something that I will keep to the day I die. I actually have a personal card from his second wife, because Colby got married, and they kind of mentioned that in the movie too. Colby was not married to Carl's mom when he died. I didn't go to Colby's funeral, but I contacted the family because Colby was somebody who I really looked up to. And I'm still pissed. Small world.
All right. Small world. 800-450-7876. Prince is calling us from Alabama. Is on line 4. Prince, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Mark from Anaheim. I'm in Alabama looking for George Williams. I can't find him.
Comes to Honeyda.
I want to ask you, Mark, it was interesting you was talking about Snipes. Shortly after that, all his movies lately has just been straight to DVD movies. So it's interesting, the fall from grace that he had. But I do remember the particular trial that you're talking about. But I know you're on a one-question rule today. I want to ask, why is Armstrong Williams so powerful in media right now?
be looking under my truck tonight. All right. Hang on. Let me take another sip before I answer this one. Hey, Mr. Nelson, you blazing it up these days? Not everything's legal? Hang on.
I guess so. That's a good question about Armstrong, but go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so Armstrong Williams, for you folks who don't know it, Armstrong Williams and I are both from South Carolina. Now, when Mr. Nelson used to appear on Stevie Wonder's station out here in L.A., he would often have Armstrong come on, because the great thing about Mr. Nelson, for you folks who don't know this, hell of a journalist. I mean, he's the first guy to interview Nelson Mandela after he got freed from prison. By the way, Mr. Nelson, do you know there are thousands, if not millions of people in this country right now you would get in an argument with because they believe that Nelson Mandela died in prison?
Wow.
No, I'm serious.
A lot of misinformation. Yeah.
No, it's worse than that. Because in their mind, that's what they really believe. This is what I'm trying to tell you, folks. Don't waste your time getting into arguments with people who don't want to hear what you have to say, because there's a lot of twisting going on in this country. There is actually a thing called the Mandela effect. I'm not making this up. Research it. You have thousands, if not millions, of people around the world who will tell you they remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison. And they are 100% honest when they're telling you this. But I digress. Now, the reason I'm saying that is Mr. Nelson never interferes with the callers, never interferes with the guests, but more importantly, he tries to bring on people of different backgrounds, different opinions, to try to give you all more than one point of view. So he would bring on Armstrong Williams, who, I mean, seriously, this guy, he was a protege of Strom Thurmond, worshipped the ground Strom Thurmond walked on, and you couldn't say anything about Republican Party, about conservatives. Back then, they didn't really call themselves the Tea Party. They were more of a nationalist populist movement, trying to promote people like Ross Perot. And I would always come on the show because I know about Armstrong. I'm from South Carolina. I know how Armstrong went to South Carolina State. And Armstrong would call me a liar when I told him that Strom Thurmond had a black daughter. Well, after Strom Thurmond died, guess who wrote a book claiming that she was Strom Thurmond's daughter, was a teacher out here in L.A. who had been a teacher for 30 years. And also, Armstrong was a big supporter of Michael Huffington, Arianna Huffington. Remember that, Mr. Nelson, when he was a Republican, came out here from Texas and tried to buy an election?
Yeah.
And I went to, I was a member of many different organizations, so I'm the only Negro in the room where Michael and Arianna Huffington were, and it was like, family values and blah, 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 blah. And Arianna and Michael got into a limousine and left their 9-year-old daughter behind. And, of course, the little white girl sees the only colored guy in the whole room, so guess who she comes over and hangs out with? So I'm like, hey, what's up? I'm talking to her. And then all of a sudden he's like, wait a minute, who's the colored guy talking to Huffington's daughter? So they ran and snatched her real fast and then had to call them up and bring them back. So, they talk about family values. They didn't even know they got in a limousine and had been gone for 15 minutes and left their daughter in a room full of strangers. So Armstrong would come on. Of course, before you folks don't know this, in spite of trying to buy the election and also trying to get Prop 187 passed where you could only teach English in the California schools, once the Republican Party used Huffington's money, they made sure he didn't win the election because they knew he was gay, Mr. Family Values, and then as soon as the election was over, he left Arianna and moved in with his boyfriend, and, the rest is history. So it's funny because everybody thinks Arianna Huffington is one of these so-called liberals and progressives, and when you know damn well, Mr. Nelson, when Armstrong and I came on your show, they were further to the right, or at least pretended to be further to the right than you could ever be. Now, why am I sharing this story? Well, you folks get all hell-bent about being a Democratic or a Republican. These folks switch sides, flip-flop anytime it fits their needs. And you're the ones still sitting here believing that there's a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Reagan was a Democratic. Hillary was a Republican. They will flip-flop whenever it serves their needs. Always have. John Connally, he was a Democratic when he got shot in that car with Kennedy. He died a Republican. Okay? They flip-flop. I haven't been in anything of any party since 1992 because that's when my eyes were open and I realized that both parties were corrupt and both parties are directly related to each other. So, Mr. Nelson, when you ask these questions, it's hilarious because everything so far we've said today, no matter even with brother calling in from Alabama, it's all connected because we talked earlier about the monopoly of Sinclair Group. Armstrong Williams now is the House Negro frontman for the Sinclair Group that's going to control 73% of all television stations in this country.
Wow. And Mark mentioned Arianna Huffington. Before she founded the Huffington Post, she was a regular guest on our show talking about politics all the time. You remember those days?
I got to be careful. Hang on, let me take another sip here, then I'll. Okay.
While you take a sip,
I'll just say this. Back in my bad boy days, I used to hang out in Beverly Hills, Newport Beach, and also Anaheim Hills with some of the wealthiest and most connected women who were from countries like Austria, Hungary, and the former Soviet country. If you notice, all of Trump's wives come from Soviet.
Yeah, hang on a sec, because they tell me we got to take a break here. 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark. We take your calls next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to him is 800-450-7876. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish your...
Yeah, I know you were, because you want me to get in trouble. Mr. Nelson was alluding to the fact that earlier that Arianna Huffington used to come on the show all the time, you know. But it was funny because, I mean, seriously, when they first came to California, they were the ones with the Texas oil money, and they came out here, and they were far right-wing conservative, blah, 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 blah. And what I was saying before the break was back in my bad boy days, you know, I used to hang out in Beverly Hills and Anaheim Hills and Newport Beach, and most of the women who taught me what was really going on were women from the former Ottoman Empire countries and the former Soviet bloc countries, specifically former Yugoslavia area. So you're talking about Serbia, Bosnia, Austria, Hungary. And for you folks who don't understand what's going on in this country today, once the so-called Cold War ended, many of those folks came here. And they have the wealth, they have the so-called aristocratic blue blood. And I'm not making this up. I'm talking going back all the way to Vlad the Impaler. You know who Vlad the Impaler is, right, Mr. Nelson?
No, I don't.
Dracula.
No. Dracula. Okay, no.
You laughing. I'm serious as a heart attack. And what you need to understand, folks, is the holy wars, the crusades have begun again. So for you folks who don't really know what's going on, I suggest you do your homework and find out who Vlad the Impaler was. Because they're bringing it back to Constantinople and going up against the so-called Ottoman Empire with the Turks. Okay? That's why we got this major war going on in Syria right now. The holy wars have never ended, but the crusades are beginning again, Mr. Nelson. And you got many of these folks are so-called Christians when they're actually phony Christians. But they have never forgotten what happened back in the days of the Ottoman Empire and what the Muslims did to the Christians during the Crusades, and they're about to get it on, Mr. Nelson. That's why we're about to try to find an excuse to get into a war with Iran.
All right, it's got some more. So,
folks, if you didn't get anything out of this conversation, Vlad, V as in Victor, L-A-D as in David, the Impaler, Dracula.
800-450-7876. Albert's reaching out to us from Nashville. He's on line 5. Albert, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Thanks, Mr. Nelson, for taking my call. Major Payne, thank you for giving us information. Quick question about the ladies who drove the truck over the embankment and the little boy who was holding the, the free hugs sign, and I'll take my answer off the air. Appreciate you guys. RIP to Brother Greg also. Thank you.
I really need to learn to listen before the person even answers the question. I'm already laughing because I already know what I'm sorry, I got to quit doing that. But anyway, in this country right now, just as the sister who called in from Iowa, you got murders going on, blood rituals going on, and the media doesn't talk about it. Lucifer's having a good time. But there are a lot of Luciferians that you have now permeated throughout your governments, your corporations, and your news. You folks act like the news is different. the frat boys who were in college that couldn't be macho went into journalism. They're still members of the same fraternity. They don't tell on their brothers, and they produce the stories that their brothers in the corporations or the armed forces want them to put out there, or intelligence agencies. So, Mr. Nelson, murder-suicide in this country right now is at an all-time high. Now, earlier, Sister asked about CDC, Center for Disease Control. One of the things that the Tea Party libertarians did was to really restrict the budget of the Center for Disease Control, and more importantly, there was a law change. The same lobbyist groups with the NRA and all who were pushing for pro-gun legislation in the 90s. One of the things they got passed through also was to stop the CDC from keeping accurate statistical data on just how many people are murdered and or suicides from firearms. Well, these women didn't use a firearm. They chose, there was two lesbians who were mothers, car full of family members. The children, the mothers, they all voluntarily drove off a cliff. But murder-suicide is at all-time rate in this country right now, Mr. Nelson, and that's getting very little media coverage.
All right, and you should point out the children were adopted, they were all black.
I tried not to bring that up, but Mr. Nelson, but since you decided to bring that up, I'll just say this.
Yes.
There are lots of black women today who think that, it's okay to marry a white guy, and I'll never be the first to tell you who to marry because, I'm an equal opportunity slut. But the point is, I've just known so many black women who were married to white men who those men later on either end up killing them or end up calling them the N-word.
All right. Having said that, let's take another call.
I'm just,
800-450-7876. V's calling from D.C. on line 2. V, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Yes, good evening. I have a question about somewhere within the last year. I can't remember exactly what part of the year. There was a woman named Reality Winner who actually leaked some information about voting machines that were hacked. She was a contractor that worked with the government, and I know she was arrested and all of that. But, you heard the story for about a day or two, and you never heard about it again. Yeah. They refused to identify the state where these machines were hacked. So I'm wondering, could you address that? Because I'm curious about it.
Well, believe it or not, the League of Women Voters used to be primarily responsible for collecting the data on voting. And once the Republicans, basically folks that we call Tea Party libertarians now, once they were able to eliminate the League of Women Voters of having that oversight, voting has always been corrupt in this country. But after they got rid of the League of Women Voters, there was basically little or no oversight. You brought in what's called a D-Bold, D-I-E-B-O-L-D, like the word die-bold, D-Bold machines, which are easily corrupted, which are easily hacked. These companies that control the voting machines believe because of their proprietary right, you don't even have the right to come in and inspect their machines because they're claiming that you would be able to give their data to some competing company. Reality, she did do the leak. She appears to be receiving a stiffer penalty than most people would be for being a whistleblower type thing. I haven't been following that case in recent weeks, but what I will say to you from this, with the 2018 midterm elections coming up, and with all the suggestions of possible Russian interference in our last election, and also now other countries are claiming that Russia did interfere with their elections, it's really sad that both Congress and the White House have seemed to be doing little to ensure that the voting machines are not going to be compromised for the 2018 elections. Now, I came on this show back in 2012, and I told the listeners that the plan was to take Obama out by the voting machines, and that's like in Ohio, for example, Mitt Romney's son owns the voting machines. But back during that time, they had white hats. White hats went in. They didn't rig the computers for Obama, but what they did do was clean out all the bugs that other folks had put in to make sure that Mitt Romney would have won. That's why Mitt Romney had that shocked look on his face when he lost, because he knew not only did his son own the voting machines in Ohio, but he paid millions of dollars for folks like Karl Rove and others to make sure in Florida and other places Romney would have won. But the White Hats did their job. Sadly, in 2016, there were more black hats out there than white hats, and Trump ended up in the White House. And even though Hillary Clinton got the popular vote, still Trump got into the White House by them changing enough to change the outcome of the electoral college. So what I'm saying is right now, I'm not going to dare make any predictions on what's going to happen here in 2018 in the midterm elections, but what I will tell you is it doesn't appear that our voting machines are any safer today from compromise, as what reality was alluding to, than we were in the last two elections. And if that's the case, regardless of the outcome, this may be a time when the Democratic Party is going to take back not only the House, but also the U.S. Senate. And I think regardless of what the outcome is going to be, people are going to call foul, and that may lead us even closer to a civil war in this country.
Are we still on track?
For a civil war?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. In fact, the civil war has already started. Like I said before, you got people dying left and right. You just ain't hearing about it. What do you think Las Vegas was? What do you think Parkland was? If you folks don't pay attention, if you notice, most of these mass shootings happen in public schools. Betsy DeVos, who's head of Secretary of Education, John Birch Society. Brother Eric Prince, Blackwater boy, John Birch Society. They don't like public schools. They call them government schools. Go back and watch the movie Ride with the Devil, which shows a brother, by the way, the same brother that was in the, the Hunger Games. The brother was doing all the games for Hunger Games. But anyway, that brother was in Ride with the Devil. In that movie, they showed you how much not so much the Confederate States of America, but the Quantrell boys, Jesse James gang type, how they went into, Kansas and just burned the town down, but they wanted to get rid of that public school, that government school that was teaching blacks, whites, women, men, and everybody else together. They have that same mentality now, Mr. Nelson. All public schools should be eliminated. And if you notice, all these damn shootings are happening in not just public schools, well-to-do neighborhoods of public schools. Now these white folks with money are taking their children out those public schools and put them in charter schools. And if you haven't heard about it yet, Mr. Nelson, because you will soon, do you know one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the Cook County area today just voted to get rid of all semi-automatic guns similar to AR-15s?
No, I did not hear about that. But hang on a sec. We got to take another break. I'll let you finish your thought and tell us about that out there in Chicagoland. 800-450-7876. Number to call. Speak to Mark. We'll take your calls next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. The number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish your thought. You started right before we left for the break.
In trouble. As I was saying before the break, most of your school shootings happen in well-to-do, predominantly white neighborhoods. That's why they don't have metal detectors, because these kind of things don't happen in our neighborhoods. Those things don't happen by accident. They happen by design. And it's turning those types of folks away from sending their children to public schools, which, of course, the Tea Party and John Birch Society call government schools. The government schools are brainwashing our children to like Negroes, to like lesbians, to want to have this rainbow kumbaya coalition. Get your children out to government schools. And a lot of folks, after their children have been involved in a school that's been into a school shooting, I'd be curious right now to wonder how many people at Parkland have already taken their children out and sent them to private schools, sending them to charter schools. It's all happening by design, folks. Seriously. I'm not being conspiratorial. I'm just telling you a fact. I'm sure you folks don't go back and check it out. But today, in Cook County, Illinois, a very well-to-do community that didn't want to have a Parkland High School type shooting have passed a law. Basically, and I know it's going to get you're going to hear about it, Mr. Nelson. Even I have to tell you this: what they came out with is definitely going to be challenged by the NRA, the Second Amendment gun nuts, and the whole country. even liberals are going to go, because these folks voted that all the rifles that resemble like the AR-15 or any weapon that could be considered a military assault-style type weapon, not only is it illegal, Mr. Nelson, if you legally own the weapon, you have 60 days to turn that weapon in. Every day after those 60 days that you don't turn that weapon in, guess how much it costs you for each weapon you have in possession?
How much?
$1,000 a day.
When you complete, I thought I got a question for you.
I've completed it.
Just all right. Just standing out of the newsroom here. The FBI has just offered a $10,000 reward for the fugitive airline mechanic in the 1996 ValueJet crash. That's more than 20 years ago. Nobody's spoken about ValueJet till you spoke about it.
Come on, Mr. Nelson. That happens. Look, I got folks on this radio station. You have listeners on your station who will vouch and tell you. I post something on Facebook, and the next day it's in the news. I come on your show and say something, the next day it's on Coast to Coast AM. Now, I just told you folks about ValueJet, and Mr. Nelson just told you. In fact, one of your listeners, Mr. Nelson, contacted me last night, and I said, look, brother, I can't give you much information on that question, but it kind of reminds me of the time when I was on the phone, and I said, I believe Tupac's down in Cuba, and he's with his aunt. The next day, the FBI reissued a new warrant for Tupac's aunt in Cuba. And then I said, that reminded me of the time I was on the phone talking about how the Jack the Ripper, I believe he's buried under the new Scotland Yard. I go to work at LAPD, and I'm up at the training division at the academy. All of a sudden, this State Department official comes in with some commander from the new Scotland Yard who wants to go through the same simulator I put you through. And while the State Department guy is being distracted, the guy from Scotland Yard goes, so Ahmad, tell me, what is it you think that you might have heard or think that you might, what is your theory when it comes to Jack the Ripper? So I'm just glad you just said that for the folks on the radio there because, you know, I'm conspiratorial and I'm paranoid. Come on, Mr. Nuss. You know how many people right now listen to this show because they knew I was going to be on it right now? The ValueJet, there's a lot more to ValueJet, and I'll just say that. ValueJet had the contract for the 1996 Olympics. After they were sabotaged, Delta Airlines got that contract. But let's move on, Mr. Nelson, because we're running out of time.
Let's go to line 3. Ryan's waiting for us from Delaware. Ryan, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
My call.
Ryan there? Your question?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Carl. Thanks for taking my call. Mark, don't ever stop doing what you do. I've been on this broadcast today looking for something to find a chink in the armor, and you're right on in everything that you stated, from Vlad the Impaler to the theory of the right and the left wing having belonged to the same bird. Yes, Hillary Clinton started as a Republican. But here's my question. What do you say to the accuracy of the work of William Pepper in his book, Orders to Kill, about the Memphis police lieutenant who's fired the fatal shot?
Okay. I knew I wasn't going to get away with this show because Mr. Nelson always has some very intelligent listeners. So I was hoping I could get away today without a tough question. So before I get started on this, for those folks out there who want to get in touch with me, I can be reached at Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101, and that's on Facebook. Once again, by the way, that's a fan page, not the group site. I got rid of that group site years ago, but Facebook doesn't let you get rid of it. Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook. All right, brother. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was only 10 years old. I was sitting at home watching on TV. All of a sudden, NBC was interrupted by a news broadcast. I was angry. Why was I angry? I didn't even know who the hell Martin Luther King Jr. was. So that weekend, I'm living, I'm on Johns Island, South Carolina. It's Jim Crow. This is 1968. Back then, we still had segregated theaters. Now, we had all-white theaters that were integrated. Colored folks. We had the colored section up in the balcony, which I know always blew me away because we had the best seats. But we also had an all-black theater. And I would go to the all-black theater where the popcorn was nasty. Sometimes I would throw up roaches, rats infested. But it was great because unlike what folks think that Gene Autry was the singing cowboy, we had Herb Jeffries, Black Cowboy, who's the original singing cowboy in this country. All black movies you never saw anywhere else. So I'm leaving the theater. I'm seeing all these guys in uniforms. I'm only 10 years old. I'm curious. So I walk down the street. I go to the College of Charleston, which is only a square block, had barbed wire around it, National Guard. And this one white National Guard with I know what it is now, I didn't know back then, but with an M1 bayonet on the end of it, he sticks a bayonet right in my face and says, "Keep moving, N-word," since I'm going to be polite today and not use that word on Mr. Nelson's show. So I ended up going to that school years later, but I say all this to you because the following year, the first photographs I've ever taken was during the Charleston, South Carolina 1969 hospital strike. Coretta Scott King was there. Ralph Abernathy was there. The photographs I took would be collector's items today, but back in those days, you took it to Rexall drugstore. All my photographs mysteriously disappeared when I went to go pick them up. So the very first photographs I ever took, which was in 1969 with Coretta Scott King and Ralph Abernathy on the front lines, I don't have those photographs. Now, I say all that to you because, of course, 1981, I'm about to graduate from the College of Charleston, the same school where, Negroes couldn't go to, and our mascot was a spare trucking Cameroon, okay, which later became a cougar. I met Dick Gregory. Now, Dick Gregory was speaking at a church, and there's some white students from the College of Charleston who told me about it. So I went to this black church, and I met Dick Gregory, and Dick Gregory said, "Hey, Ronald Reagan's going to be shot, but don't worry about it because he's going to survive." And sure enough, a few months later. And then Dick and I kind of kept in touch, but we really didn't work that really close. So I started doing shows with Mr. Nelson and coming on with Dick Gregory. Well, to answer your question, there's always a meaning, folks, to my madness and going along on this. Dick Gregory and I had many, 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 many conversations. Unfortunately, some of the things he and I talked about, I still will not share because I worry about the safety of my family. I don't give a damn about me. I worry about my surfers, and I worry about my family. But apparently, when I was in Charleston, the one thing I remember being a little 11-year-old boy was going in the post office in downtown Charleston and seeing a poster for Eric Galt. They weren't even looking for James Earl Ray, but then it turns out later on the photographs of some guy named Eric Galt. But Eric Galt turned out to be a guy who worked for the National Security Agency in real life. At the meantime, there was also a guy named Raoul. Now, what's interesting is the FBI was looking for Eric Galt.
Shucks.
All right, we're going to have to drop line 3, Ryan. We can't have you comment.
Okay. I know, because sometimes when I'm telling you folks stuff, you're going to have reactions like that. But anyway, Eric Galt was actually an NSA employee, and the only person who knew that James Earl Ray used the name Eric Galt was a guy called Raoul. Now, from the research I've done and talking to Dick Gregory and others, Raoul was supposedly a guy who actually worked for the Louisiana State Police Department. His actual identity, I haven't been able to confirm. William Pepper came up with one name, but they weren't sure. However, there's been some conflict in this information because there appears to be some other guy who was a lieutenant with Memphis Police Department who may have been involved with that shooting that they're confusing with Raoul. I do know that all black fire department personnel and all black police personnel were either sent home, sent on vacation, or actually reassigned to other areas before King was assassinated. But what I will say to you is this. Apparently Mark Lane, as well as Dick Gregory, were convinced enough with the information that William Pepper had found that they had agreed with him on his final summation, which is, I guess, what they were going to suggest in regards to Wesley Snipes possibly making another movie. And I'm sorry that Dick Gregory's not with us today because I'm sure he would be the one to answer this question better than anybody else. But Mr. Nelson, maybe Wesley Snipes would be able to answer this question. So what I would just say with the brother is this. Dick Gregory and Mark Lane knew far better than I, and they didn't seem to have a problem with the information that William Pepper provided in regards to who he thought may have been the actual shooter.
All right, let's see if we can get another call for you.
Before you go, Mr. Nelson, I'll just tell you folks this. There were at least 3 different teams there, some private contractors, some military intelligence. They don't even know who each other were. There was a lot more going on in that city that day than you will ever know. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, Deborah's waiting for us from Delaware. Deborah, can you make it quick?
Very quick. Mark, I don't know if you watched The Black Mirror or not. And you should,
watch the what?
The Black Mirror. But I just wanted to know what you thought about Walmart patenting Bumblebee drones.
Okay, I don't watch television, so I have no idea what the TV show she's referring to. As far as Walmart goes, Walmart is actually indirectly under attack right now because most of Walmart's products come from China. And under the president's new tariff rules, there's no less than 125 products coming out of China that's going to have a 25% increase in their tariff costs. Mm-hmm. What you will see, Walmart's not the only one. Monsanto is patenting things that nature created. So I'm not surprised that Walmart's doing the same thing. They're going to want to hold anything. They're going to want to control everything. And for us to be able to eat or survive and go along with the program, we're going to have to come to them for our sustenance. So that doesn't surprise me at all, sister.
Okay.
Thanks, Deborah. Quick question here. Please ask your guest, was Armstrong Williams changed at all when Reverend Pinckney's first cousin was murdered by Dylan Roof?
No. And Armstrong Williams will do what he's told because there's a lot of the far right-wing Republicans have always had dirt on Armstrong, and Armstrong's going to do what he's told. So even if Armstrong does have a change of heart, he's been compromised. He can't do anything. And that's why, if for you folks don't know it, he was the campaign manager for Ben Carson when Ben Carson was running for president.
How can we reach you real quick?
Just meet Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook. And Mr. Nelson, I'll talk to you later if my truck doesn't blow up.
Okay, we'll talk later. Folks are out of here. Stay strong, stay positive. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.